All right, Victor Wenbanyama. On the surface, the headline is pretty simple. Wenbanyama signed a massive contract extension with the San Antonio Spurs. 5 years, around 252 million. Folks, he is staying in San Antonio through at least the beginning of the next decade. And obviously, nobody should be surprised that the Spurs wanted to lock him up. If you have Victor Wembanyama, you give him whatever contract he asks for, you put the pen in his hand, and you do not let him leave the building until that contract is signed. Right? That part was pretty much automatic. But the most important part of this deal is not that Wemby got paid. The important part is how he got paid. Because Wembanyama reportedly agreed to the normal 25% rookie maximum instead of allowing his contract to increase to the 30% supermax level that he could have qualified for. That decision could leave more than $50 million on the table over the life of the contract and give San Antonio significantly more financial flexibility. His 5-year extension is reportedly worth about 252 million and contains a player option in the final season. And when I saw that, my first thought was not just this is a nice team friendly move. My first thought was this is exactly how a dynasty begins. Not because one discount automatically guarantees a championship, not because the Spurs are now going to win the next 5 NBA finals, but because the most difficult part of building a dynasty is not finding the superstar. San Antonio already found him. The difficult part is keeping enough talent around that superstar once everybody starts getting expensive, right? And Wemby may have just made that job a lot easier. So today we're going to break down why this contract is so important, how it helps the Spurs keep their young core together, why San Antonio might be better positioned than almost any team in the league as far as long-term success, and what could still prevent this team from becoming the NBA's next dynasty. Because let's be clear, the Spurs do not just have a good young team anymore. They have the foundation of something that could control the league for years. And so, with that being said, let's just get into it. First, let's explain this contract, right? So, before we start throwing around words like dynasty, we need to understand what Wemby actually agreed to. Under the NBA's contract rules, a player with Wembanyama's level of experience normally begins a maximum contract at 25% of the salary cap. However, elite young players can qualify for an increase to 30% by reaching certain performance benchmarks. That extra 5% might not sound dramatic, but when the NBA salary cap is approaching and eventually passing $170 million, 5% of the cap is a serious amount of money. We're talking about millions of dollars every season, right? And over 5-year contract, that difference can grow beyond 50 million. The reported deal gives Wemby roughly $252 million over the next 5 seasons rather than the approximately $303 million he could have received with the higher escalator, right? Now let's make something clear though. Wemby is still getting paid an unbelievable amount of money. Nobody needs to start a fundraiser for him. He's going to be doing just fine, especially being in San Antonio, right? But in NBA terms, this is a meaningful sacrifice. And it is even more meaningful because Wembanyama had all the leverage. He's not a borderline all-star trying to prove himself. He's not a player whose value is uncertain. He's the reigning defensive player of the year. He has already established himself as one of the most dominant two-way players in basketball. He led San Antonio to the NBA Finals while averaging career highs of 25 points, 11.5 rebounds, and 3 assists. Not to mention, led the league in blocks with more than 3 a game, right? Wemby could have taken every dollar available and nobody would have criticized them. The Spurs would have happily paid it. Instead, he appears to have looked at the long-term picture and said, I want to win more than I want the biggest possible number contract, right? That matters because when your franchise player starts thinking like that at 22 years old, everyone else in the organization starts to pay attention, right? This is a very Spurs-esque, Tim Duncan-esque type decision. There's something also perfect about this happening in San Antonio because the Spurs have seen this before, right? Like I said, Tim Duncan was famous for accepting less money later in his career to help San Antonio maintain a championship roster. Duncan understood something that a lot of stars eventually learn a little too late. There's a difference between maximizing your contract and maximizing your career, right? It's just a matter of what your priorities are. The biggest possible contract might give you more money, but a slightly smaller deal can help your organization keep another starter, sign another veteran, or avoid being trapped by the salary cap. And championships change how a player is remembered forever. Nobody talks about Tim Duncan as a player who failed to squeeze every possible dollar out of the Spurs. People talk about 5 championships. They talk about nearly two decades of winning. They talk about one of the greatest power forwards ever. They talk about a dynasty. Now, Wemby appears to be adopting a similar mindset, and that does not mean he is guaranteed to become Tim Duncan. That comparison is unfair to both players, but the organizational philosophy is similar. The superstar is telling the front office, I will do my part. Now make sure you do yours. And that is the message. And from this point forward, San Antonio has, no excuses. Wemby has given the organization additional flexibility. The Spurs now have to use that correctly, right? Now, why does 5% of the cap matter so much? Some fans hear 25% instead of 30% and think that the difference is small. I can tell you it is not. The modern NBA is extremely difficult for expensive teams. The league's first and second aprons do not just create a larger luxury tax bill, they restrict how teams can improve, right? Teams above those levels can lose access to certain exceptions. Their ability to combine salaries and trades become limited. They can face restrictions involving future draft picks. They can essentially become trapped with the roster they already have. That is a massive problem for teams trying to remain competitive over a long period. It is one thing to build a championship roster, right? It's another thing to maintain that roster after your young players receive extensions. And San Antonio has several young players who could eventually become expensive. For example, we have Stephon Castle. He's developing into a major piece. Dylan Harper is another foundational guard with star potential. Devin Vassell is already on a substantial long-term contract, right? The Spurs have veterans, role players, and future roster decisions to manage. The reason Wemby's contract matters is because every dollar San Antonio saves on his deal can be used somewhere else. So that does not necessarily mean the Spurs will suddenly have $50 million in open cap space, right? NBA finances do not work that simply, but it gives them more breathing room below the tax aprons. It gives them more flexibility when negotiating extensions. It could make the difference between keeping a valuable role player and losing a valuable role player, right? It could make the difference between completing a major trade and being prevented from doing it. It could also allow them to use an exception that would otherwise be unavailable. When you're trying to build a dynasty, those small margins are everything, right? Championship teams are often separated by the 7th or 8th player in the rotation. Everybody knows the stars, but playoff series can be decided by the backup guard who survives 12 minutes without turning the ball over, the wing who can defend 3 positions, right? The big man who protects the rim while Wemby rests, right? We saw Luke Cornett made some bad plays and some good plays as well, right? The shooter who hits 2 threes in the fourth quarter. Those players cost money as well. And Wemby's decision makes it even easier to keep those guys, right? So the reason I'm comfortable talking about dynasty potential is because San Antonio already possesses the rare asset in basketball, a true franchise-altering superstar. Teams can spend decades searching for one of these guys. Some franchises never had one. And Wemby is not some simple all-star, as we all know. he changes the basic geometry of a basketball court. Defensively, players have to reconsider shots that would normally be available. A guard might beat his defender and get into the lane, but Wemby is standing near the rim. So now that guard hesitates, he pulls the ball back, he throws a pass that was not part of the original plan, or he attempts a high, awkward layup to avoid the reach of Wemby. Even when Wemby does not block the shot, he changes the possession, right? So this is what makes him so valuable. His impact goes beyond the box score, and offensively, he creates a completely different type of problem. He can score at the rim, he can shoot from the outside, he can handle the ball, he can attack slower centers from the perimeter, he can post smaller defenders, he can catch passes at heights that are impossible for other players to reach, right? So there's no traditional defensive matchup for a guy like Wemby. If you put a center on Wemby, he can pull that center away from the basket. If you put a forward on him, Wemby can shoot over the top or take him to the post, right? If you double team him, San Antonio can play 4-on-3 basketball on the other side. And the scary part is that he is still developing. I know we saw what the difficulties he had scoring against Cat in the NBA Finals, but this is a guy who is still developing, right? Cat is at the peak of his talents and skills, right? Wemby is still developing. That is the foundation of a dynasty argument, if you ask me. The Spurs have a player who can be the best defender in the world and the best offensive player in the world at the same time. That gives San Antonio a championship ceiling before we even discuss the rest of the roster. And the young guards make the fit even scarier. So let's talk about Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper, because this is where the Spurs' future really become interesting. San Antonio is now building around Wemby with aging players who are going to decline before he reaches his prime, right? They are surrounding him with young guards who can grow alongside him. Castle gives the Spurs size, defense, physicality, and the ability to attack the paint, right? He guards multiple positions, he can handle the ball, he can put pressure on the rim. And because he is still so young, his shooting and playmaking can still develop, right? Then we saw what Dylan Harper did in the NBA Finals, right? At times, people argue that he should have been started over. De'Aaron Fox, even, right? Harper gives San Antonio another big ball handler who can create advantages, play through contact, and operate as either a primary or secondary initiator. So now imagine what this team looks like when everyone gets closer to their prime. You have Wemby protecting the rim, you have large physical guards defending the perimeter, you have multiple players capable of initiating the offense. You have fewer small defenders for opposing teams to target in the playoffs. Like we saw Jalen Brunson, as good as he is, he even gets targeted just due to size. Now he has the offensive ability to make up for that, but it still happens, right? And this is the modern championship formula: versatility, size, multiple creators, and an elite defensive anchor. The Spurs, they have all four. Wemby's smaller cap number becomes important because Castle and Harper will eventually become eligible for their own extensions. If they become stars, when they become stars, right, they're going to get paid like stars. And that is a good problem, but it's still a problem, right? A team can draft perfectly and still lose pieces because they just can't afford everyone. Wemby's sacrifice increases the chance that San Antonio can retain those players during the seasons when all three contracts begin overlapping, right? And that's a real dynasty window, not just next year. The period when Wemby, Castle, and Harper are all experienced enough to dominate, but still young enough to sustain it over several seasons. Oh my. They also have De'Aaron Fox. Fox changes the timeline because he gives San Antonio an established star right now. I know a lot of people was disappointed in his performance in the finals. I know he was dealing with injuries, whatever the case may be, but he is a star point guard, starting point guard on 30 out of 30 NBA teams, right? Not counting obviously teams where their point guard might be their superstar. But he's not a prospect. He does not need 4 years to figure out how to run an NBA offense. He can create separation. He can pressure the rim. He can close games, right? He can give Wemby an experienced pick and roll partner. And most importantly, he allows the younger guards to develop without immediately carrying the entire offensive burden, right? And that balance is important. Some young teams fail because every player is learning at the same time. Nobody knows how to settle the offense. Nobody knows how to handle a playoff crowd. Nobody knows how to execute in the final 2 minutes. So Fox gives the Spurs somebody who has already played high-level basketball and can organize the team when possessions become chaotic. And like I said, he didn't play too good in the finals, we know this, but he's still the point guard of this team at the moment, right? Everyone wants to talk about Dylan Harper starting over Fox, but we don't know what Dylan Harper looks like when the sole focus is on him, right? It's easy to shine when you're coming off the bench, and mind you, he's a great player. He's going to be a star in this league, don't get me wrong, but it's easier to shine when you're coming off the bench and teams can't really focus on you, right? Versus a De'Aaron Fox who's been in the league and teams game plan for while coming off injury, right? So that's just something to think about. Now, Fox contract is significant. We can't ignore that. But if Fox remains productive, he can serve as the bridge between Wemby's early years and the point when Castle or Harper is ready to become that primary star, right? That primary guard, right? That creates different paths for the Spurs. They can keep Fox and attempt to win immediately. They can eventually shift more responsibility toward the younger guards in the next coming years. Or if the fit changes, Fox's contract could potentially become part of a future roster move, right? That's an important thing, is that San Antonio is not depending on only one timeline. They have talent for the present and talent for the future. So San Antonio can now be patient. One of the biggest benefits of Wemby committing long term is that the Spurs do not have to panic, right? They do not need to make a desperate trade because they are afraid he will leave next summer. They do not need to sacrifice every future draft pick for the first available star, right? As we see happening time and time again. They do not need to overpay a veteran just to prove to their star that they are trying, right? They have Wemby under contract through the 31-32 season. Although the reported player option in the final year means the Spurs still need to prove that they can consistently contend, that gives them time, right? And patience is one of the biggest advantages that a front office can have. San Antonio can evaluate how Castle and Harper develop. They can see which players fit best next to Wemby. Then they can wait for the correct trade opportunity, right? Because in the NBA, there's always another star who becomes available. Always, right? Every year, someone becomes unhappy. Some team disappoints in the playoffs. Some expensive roster reaches the end of its run. And suddenly, an all-star is on the market, right? The Spurs do not need to force that move today. They can wait until the right player becomes available for the right price. This is how smart teams operate. They don't need to trade because they are bored, right? They trade when the move improves the championship probability without destroying the future. And actually, the finals loss could actually help them in this case scenario, right? Because San Antonio's run to the finals showed that this team is already ahead of schedule. The Spurs won 62 games before reaching the finals, where they lost to the New York Knicks. Obviously, nobody wants to lose, right? Nobody reaches the finals and feels satisfied with second place. But that experience could become extremely valuable. Young teams often need to lose before they know how to win. They need to experience how physical basketball playoff becomes, right? They need to understand how teams attack the same weaknesses repeatedly. They gotta learn how much harder it is to close a series than to win a regular season game, right? Now, Wemby knows what that finals feels like. Castle knows what the finals feels like. Harper knows what the finals feels like. The organization knows which part of the roster held up and which one became weaknesses. That information matters. The Spurs are no longer building based on a theory. They now have evidence. They know what their team looks like against the best competition. They can spend the next few seasons addressing specific problems instead of guessing. Maybe they need more shooting. Maybe they need another big wing. Maybe they need a more reliable backup center. Or maybe they need another veteran playmaker. Whatever the answer is, Wemby's contract gives them a little more freedom to find that, right? And speaking of that, veterans matter too. The Spurs also appear to understand that a dynasty cannot be built entirely with young talent. San Antonio added Tobias Harris on a reported 2-year, $31 million contract, right? Bringing in a veteran forward with significant regular season and playoff experience. They also brought Harrison Barnes back on a 1-year, $8 million deal. So these are not moves that's going to dominate social media. Nobody's making a 1-hour television special about a veteran role player signing in San Antonio. But these moves matter. Young teams need adults in the room. They need players who know how to prepare during a long season. They need veterans who can remain calm after a bad loss. They need people who understand that playoff series change from game to game. So you are not asking Harris or Barnes to become the face of the franchise. You're asking them to provide stability around these young stars. And because Wemby did not take the higher contract percentage, San Antonio has a better chance of continuing to add those types of players without becoming financially trapped, right? So let's put this entire argument together, right? Why could the Spurs become a dynasty? Number one, they have the potential best player in basketball. And side note, I believe he is the best player in basketball, even at his young age. So that is always the starting point of a dynasty. The majority of NBA dynasties are built around a player who's either the best in the league or very close to it. Number two, their superstar affects both ends of the court. Wemby does not need to score 40 points to dominate. He can control a game defensively entirely. That gives the Spurs more ways to win. Number three, their core is young. Wemby is 22. Castle and Harper are still at the beginning of their careers. This is not a team with a 2-year window, right? Number four, they have already experienced the finals. The Spurs are not waiting for the hypothetical moment when the young talent becomes competitive. They have already reached that level. Fifth, Wemby's contract creates added flexibility. The difference between a 25% and a 30% starting salary can help San Antonio avoid the most restrictive financial penalties and retain more of their talent, right? Number six, the franchise has a history of stability. As we know, it's the Spurs. The Spurs are not known for constantly changing direction. They value development, continuity, and organizational discipline, right? Number seven, Wemby appears to care about building something long term, right? It's that attitude. That might be the most important point, right? A franchise can have all the talent in the world, but if the superstar is constantly questioning the organization or planning his next destination, the foundation remains unstable. All right. Wemby just gave San Antonio a powerful vote of confidence. He's essentially saying, I believe this can work. Now let's go build it. All right. But a dynasty is not guaranteed. Now, I don't want to act like the league should just cancel the next 6 seasons, right? There's real risk. First thing is health, right? Wemby's body is unlike almost anything we have seen in basketball. San Antonio has to manage his workload carefully. A dynasty is impossible if its superstar cannot stay on the floor. right? So the second concern is shooting. Castle and Harper bring size and physicality, but the Spurs need reliable spacing around Wemby, right? In the playoffs, teams will test every weak shooter, right? If San Antonio's guards cannot punish the defenses from outside, opponents may crowd Wemby space. The third concern is contract timing. Even with Wemby taking less, Castle and Harper could eventually become extremely expensive. So the Spurs will still face difficult decisions. The discount definitely helps. It does not eliminate the salary cap. The fourth issue would be competition. The Western Conference, people, is not going to step aside. Other young contenders are building their own cores. OKC is right there. The Timberwolves are right there, right? Established stars are still competing. Golden State is still there. Jokic is still there, people. Still there. And teams will specifically construct rosters designed to attack Wemby. The fifth concern is that San Antonio still needs to find the perfect supporting cast, right? Having talent is not enough. The pieces need to complement each other. The Spurs need shooting, perimeter defense, secondary creation, and enough size to prevent Wemby from handling every physical matchup. So, no, a dynasty is not guaranteed, right? But when we talk about the teams with the clearest paths toward one, San Antonio has to be near the top of that list. So Wemby just set the standard. What I really like about this decision is the message it sends inside the locker room. The best player on the team just made a sacrifice, right? That means everyone has to look in the mirror. If Wemby is willing to leave money to improve the roster, then who are you to say no, right? The young players have to work. The veterans have to accept their roles. The coaching staff has to hold everyone accountable. You cannot watch your franchise players sacrifice and then become comfortable. That is how a culture gets established. Not through motivational speeches, but through actions, right? Wemby could have said he wanted to win. Instead, he instructed his contract in a way that may genuinely help his team do it, right? Actions over words. And just to wrap it up, Victor Wenbanyama's new contract does not guarantee San Antonio a championship, right? It does not guarantee that Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper become superstars. It does not guarantee perfect health, and it does not guarantee the Spurs make every correct decision moving forward, right? But it gives them something that every NBA organization desperately wants, and that's a long runway with a generational player. So, yeah, man, Wemby is locked in. The young core is developing. The team has already reached the finals. The organization has financial flexibility, and the franchise player is thinking about winning championships before maximizing every possible dollar. And that's how dynasties are created. Not with one move, but with a series of advantages that continue stacking on top of each other, right? The Spurs drafted Wemby. Then they added young perimeter talent. Then they gave those players meaningful experience. Then they reached the finals. And so now Wemby has signed a contract that could help San Antonio keep the entire machine together. And so the rest is up to the front office, because Wemby has done his part. He has committed his future. He sacrificed additional money, and he has given the Spurs a chance to build something that could last far beyond one championship run. Now San Antonio has to finish that job. So let me know what you think. Does Wemby's contract make the Spurs the favorite to become the NBA's next dynasty? How many championships do you believe this core can win? And which player should San Antonio add next to complete the roster? So just leave your answer in the comments and subscribe to STT Sports for more NBA commentary, breaking news, and documentary style sports stories. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for listening.